What's up, guys? Welcome back to BassQuest. Today, we're going to go over something that's been just like the talk of the town. If you're in a local tackle shop around Chickamauga Lake or Watts Bar or Nickajack or Gunnersville, there's been some crazy stuff that's been going on ever since we had Hurricane Helene. So we can backtrack all the way to the end of September when Hurricane Helene came by. It absolutely devastated parts of Florida, but especially in North Carolina and some of the northeastern parts of Tennessee. We had some dam failures, which caused like extreme catastrophic flooding. And if you guys remember back, we did a live stream with Alex Rudd and Bailey from Serious Angler, and we raised some money for that. But we've had some kind of effects that no one really saw coming on the Tennessee River, and it's made for some really interesting fishing. You know, as a full time fishing guide, I'm out on the water pretty much every day, and it's wild to see what's been going on the Tennessee River because this is unprecedented. We've never had, since these dams were impounded in the 30s, we've never seen anything like the amount of flow of sediment and debris that's come from Hurricane Helene. So let's dive into this right now. First and foremost, it's been 5 weeks now, give or take, since the hurricane impacted in that part of North Carolina. And so, what typically happens on the Tennessee River when we get a large influx of rain, which we did here, we got 7 inches of rain at my house in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is like a lot of rain for us at one time. Typically, that would cause flash flooding around here. We would have raised lake levels and some dirty water because of that. Now, what had happened is we're in a very long, like prolonged drought right now. And when this hurricane came through, it was the case. So I guess what happened was a lot of the water was probably soaked in by the ground. We got a limited amount of what I wouldn't even really call anywhere near major flooding, and then we had like a normal stain to the water. Lake levels didn't really rise, but since we had so much water that came in above us to the north of us on the Tennessee River, we got a big inflow of water, so there was a ton of current rolling through the lake. And so everything kind of stabilized, and it got really good fishing wise after that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what happened was, so this water that's coming from North Carolina, it ended up making its way into Douglas Lake. And I'll show you, let's see if we can pop over. There's a little bit of video of what's going on. You can see just tremendous amounts of debris. That's a lot of floating logs and trees and stuff like that. But there's just a ton of pollutants and stuff in there as well that happens when you have disastrous flooding like that. So there's all kinds of craziness in the water. This is literally probably going to take years to clean up just on Douglas Lake, what was going on, let alone the absolute disaster that happened in North Carolina. So if we go back over here, so there's a whole lot going on to kind of break into on this. What happened about 9 days after the hurricane hit, you know, we had already gotten clean water back, the current's ripping, fishing's great. About 9 days after, we start seeing this dirty water coming in. And there hasn't been any rain, right? Like since the hurricane. It got really strange. And then there was a little bit more dirty water. And then it's really dirty main lake, but we've got these mudlines that we're fishing. Well, a few days after that, just a matter of days, we've got 4 to 6 inch visibility up and down the Tennessee River system, which is, it does happen, but it was really interesting looking water. So when we normally get dirty water around here, I always joke that it's like Yoo-hoo, right? Like it looks like Yoo-hoo brown. So this water had like a red tint to it, had more clay in it, kind of a milky look to it, and it just hung around forever and just kept going and going and going. Let's see here, and that's one of the things that we're all wondering right now is like the environmental effects of this water, because there's a ton of pollutants that are coming down in this water. And not only that, but you got to think, so in North Carolina where this flooding happened, a lot of these rivers and creeks were completely diverted. In other words, they etched new pathways. Some of the areas that there already was a river or creek were etched down up to 60 foot. So this is sediment that hasn't been unearthed probably ever. What's in that's getting washed down the river? So there's kind of a lot of unknowns here. And because the disaster itself is so, you know, has so many issues and there's so many people in need, a lot of this other stuff has kind of fallen to the periphery. And so I don't think we'll really know the true environmental effects of what's been going on, maybe for years, as we see what's going on, as far as the river systems going down into Douglas and then eventually going into the Tennessee River. So, what are the long term effects there? We don't really know yet, but what we can see is that we've had dirty water for forever. I mean, we're going on, I'm recording this the 6th of November. The water is still dirty, but it's finally showing signs of cleaning. And so I'm going to break this down kind of in stages here. So the initial storm that we had fishing wise, we're going to go straight into fishing now. The initial storm that we had when we started getting this really good current coming in, the fishing got insane. It was really, really great. I was fishing some tail races with some buddies. We had our biggest limit of smallmouth bass ever on the Tennessee River, almost 27 pounds. My buddy caught his personal best smallmouth. I caught my biggest smallmouth ever on the river. Things were great. A lot of the main lake flats and current breaks on Chickamauga Lake, we were catching huge smallmouth there. Caught some smallmouth almost 6 pounds on Chickamauga. Caught a bunch of largemouth over 8 pounds. It was just really ripping and roaring. Now, when that water started to come in, it actually got really good for a little while, because what it did is it kind of created reverse mudlines, I guess I should say. It's really strange, because normally what would happen is you would get the water would be kind of pushing out dirty on the flats and then the creeks, and then that would be the mud line. But it was in reverse, because the mud lines were coming down the river itself, because they were coming from north of us, which was really strange. Same thing with Hiwassee. Like, Hiwassee is always the last thing to clean up, so it's pumping in dirty into Chickamauga, creating a mud line. But this time it was flip-flopped, which is just, everything is weird. It's like opposite day, Groundhog Day on all this stuff. So when this water started to get muddier and muddier, I noticed right away these fish did not like that. The fish that were out on the main lake flats, the fish that were in those current breaks, they did not like that water. I don't know if it was just the amount of sediment that was going through the lake at the time, or maybe it was, I don't know. Could have been something in the water that they didn't particularly care for, but we had a ton of fish that actually moved away from that and started going into the mouths of creeks and stuff, and gotten into a wintertime pattern, which is just kind of unprecedented in itself. We had all these roamer fish. It's like they haven't really committed yet to the fall bite, but they didn't want to be where they're at, so they did this little early migration thing. We had some big tournaments that were won open water, catching fish 4 feet under, cruising around in the middle of the channels and stuff like that. And so it just got really strange. So fast forward a little bit further, the lake is completely muddy, and I'm still seeing fish on some of these areas that I normally would fish on the main lake, some current breaks, little secondary cuts on flats, but they are not eating anything. Even though, if you guys know my charter, I do a lot of live bait fishing charters, and these fish did not even want to touch the live bait. It was wild, and I could see that they were there, and I could get them to follow, and I knew they were bass, but it's like it just wasn't happening, and I'd have to push into the creeks. And so the next stage, we're going to say stage 2, what happened is we're probably talking about 2.5 weeks after the hurricane itself, they start to drop out the current. And they do that because the lake levels have equalized. In other words, we've caught back up on pushing water through. So now it's time to go drop down, close the spillways, go down to normal flow, and continue the winter drawdowns on the lakes. Well, the water's still dirty. And what we were thinking, just dock talk in the tackle shop, I was thinking in my head, well, since we have a lot less current, we're going from 60, 70, 80,000 CFF to 20, 10, like lower levels of current, that at least on the flats, so at least on the areas that are not directly impacted by the current, with the water level falling, there'll be less of the flats that'll get the wash of the current over those areas. I thought, well, that's going to clean up pretty quickly, and the main lake may be a little dirty, but it's going to kind of get back to normal pretty fast. Well, that now is just now happening. It didn't happen before. So what we lost like the current bite, where the fish were in the current breaks, but we didn't really gain anything as far as water clarity, and so things got really weird again because we had no current breaks. Um, the Because they dropped the current, we actually had, and this is a common thing too, but it was more noticeable because of all the dirty waters. We had backflow, so we actually lost a lot of the clean water that we did have because it started to backflow into some of the major creeks and bigger pockets, and so then it was actually more dirty than it was before. But about that time, this would have been, I guess, about the middle of October. We started to get into this fall bite, so the days got shorter. These fish started to get into a fall pattern, and we started to finally see some schooling activity in the backs of the creek. So that kind of saved the bite for a lot of us guys that were out there, where you could get back there, especially in the afternoon, and go catch some of these schooling fish. But it condensed everybody as well, because it was like the frog fishing on the lake was in the pockets or in the creeks, and the schooling bite was in the pockets or in the creeks, and so everybody was all on top of each other. All right, so now we're gonna jump on to stage three here, and that's kind of where we're at now. This lake is cleaning up a little bit. There's a noticeable difference on the flats, and now it's so funny because the fish that I've been locating, I've done a bunch of homework finding the fish on these flats and seeing where things will be now that we have significantly less grass, because that's one thing. We had so much current and we had so much dirty water for so long. Plants, aquatic plants, just like plants that we have outside right now, they need to photosynthesize. So when you have a huge influx of dirty water, one, it limits the amount of light penetration, which relegates the photosynthesis more to the top end of the plant itself. Two, you have current, which tends to push the plants over, wash the plants, can pull up their root systems. And then another thing that it can do is it can actually, with the amount of sediment that's coming through the lake in a dirty water situation, it can actually kind of choke out the foliage of the plant itself. So in other words, it gets coated with the dust or sediment, or however you want to call it, silt, and it's harder for the plant to do what it needs to do to grow. And so, because of that, we lost a ton of grass during this whole event as well. We had already lost a ton because the spraying was like kind of out of control this year, to be honest. We might do a separate video about that and the fact that they're subcontracting a lot of the spraying of the lake. And so, anytime you get into that situation, you have the potential for people to, they're incentivized to, I need to spray this chemical to make sure that I get a budget for next year, regardless of whether with the environmental factors, if it needed to continue to be sprayed. Let's put it that way. So we'll leave that for another time. But what's happening now, we have limited grass, a lot fewer mats than normal, a lot less main lake grass than normal. It's slowly starting to clean up. These fish are starting to get back out there. They're getting on the places that they need to get on. And so let's jump into, I'm actually going to pop over here on this screen. All right, so I'm going to go over here to these options actually. Increase the shallow water. That way we can kind of get an idea. So these fish, what they're doing now, state of what's going on right this second, is a lot of these fish are starting to relocate back onto the flats. And what they do typically in the fall this time of year is what they'll get on these main lake flats, like you can see right here. That's not a great example because it's a little bit deeper. Let's go up here a little bit. All right, here's a good example. They'll get on these main lake flats and they'll follow, just like we talk about fish in the fall, how they go in the back of pockets in school, or they go in the back of a creek and school up. They do the same thing on these main lake flats. And what they do is they push up these little channels to where the flat itself will neck down. So it gets narrow, it gets shallower, and that's where those fish will oftentimes school up and start doing their fall feed. They'll use these troughs or secondary channels on the flat itself as traveling routes up and down in order to chase bait. Now they'll do this regardless of whether or not there's vegetation or how much vegetation there is. So A lot of these fish are in this stage right now. Finally, they're kind of getting back out of here and doing this and actually biting. And then you also have a lot of fish that are in the backs of creeks and they're doing their normal deal. What they do typically is they're going to get on these like do nothing flats. Let me close this so you don't have to see it. You can see this creek. You get to the back over here, and then there's these vast, what I call do nothing flats. They're small changes in topography, but nothing crazy. And a lot of times there's nothing really wild going on with the bottom. Now, it's really nice if you can find some little hard spots, some shell, maybe a dip, and stuff that you can, or even wood, like stumps can be really good on these flats. But by and large, it seems like a lot of the fish are more nomadic. They tend to be chasing bait around. And so a lot of times you get out here and you just have to follow where the fish are going. You're looking for a little bit of activity. You're looking for the right size bait. Now, that's another thing that we can talk about right now. There's something going on that I've never seen before on this lake. And we've commented on this for a few years now. Like, oh, we need a shad kill. Oh, we need a shad kill. Well, I will tell you what, I have never seen the amount of bait on this lake like we have it right now. I mean, it is unreal. If you fish on this lake right now until I guess about now, since the time change that's messing with me a little bit. Let's say you fish till about 5 o'clock and you start heading back into one of these creeks, you are going to be blown away by the amount of bait. Like for years, you'd pull back in there and you'd see these big schools of bait. And we've all seen that before where it's like these little disturbances on the surface of the water where these small first year class shad are up there just kind of easing around on the very top of the water column, which is what they do in the afternoons a lot of times. This year, if you go back in like Chester Frost or Harrison Bay, not Harrison Bay, but Wolf Teaver or Saudi Creek, any of these major creeks really, it looks like you could walk across bait. Instead of it being like there's a big ball of bait and there's slick, calm area, and then there's another big ball of bait. It's like all bait, and then there's kind of weird. You find these blotches areas that don't have it. So exponentially more bait. And what I've noticed with that, instead of me getting back into these do nothing flat areas and being able to just kind of immediately locate where the biggest population of bait is, or maybe the right size of bait, so I can quickly find the fish, it's like it's wall to wall in all depth ranges. And so it makes the fish a little bit harder to locate right away. I mean, even with live scope, now you would think, oh, this is, compared to when I used to do this back in the day with side scan and just my eyes and looking around, I was like, this would be way easier to do it with live scope. No, not at all, because you can't even see anything in a lot of these places with live scope. Like, I was out with a couple of guys the other day, and we see these giant ones come up, and they're chasing threadfin that look like they're, I don't know, they've got to be 7 inches, like 6 to 7 inch long threadfin. And boom, boom, just blowing up. And I troll out there on high, just hauling butt and get out there, and I can't even see anything. Like it's a veil of bait everywhere, and so I have no way to really look hardly anywhere with the sonar. We start blind casting, we randomly catch a couple, but there's no way to follow them or get after that, and so then we push shallower and we're able to find a fish there. So what happens in these creeks a lot of times, you have resident fish that live in the back of the creek, right? So they start to pull out and they kind of meet with some of the fish that do, the population of fish in the lake that actually make the migration. And they tend to meet, and that's where you get these really cool schools of fish where you can go out on these do nothing flats, and it's just like every cast, right? Where you really find a big group. What I've noticed lately is that it doesn't seem like they found each other yet. Like these guys are starting to pull out a little bit, and boom, there's all the food you could ever want. And these guys are pulling back in, and boom, there's all the food you would ever want. So there's no incentive to kind of like get in this area and group up like they used to do in a lot of these places. So it's kind of changed the ball game a little bit. And it's really funny when I'm fishing for these schools of fish, because it's like you go to the shallower area or the back of some of these areas and you catch fish that are like really pretty. They're very green. They look like they've been living in grass or living up shallow. And then you like pull out a little bit to a mid-depth area, and you start catching fish, and they're kind of that pale color that you see when there's, you know, fish that are main lake, especially the main lake fish that were in that dirtier water. And so it's like that nobody's found each other yet in a lot of these areas. And so what I've done to kind of remedy that fact is I've pushed into smaller creeks and smaller pockets. And when you do that, because of the limited size area, it makes it a little bit easier to break down. And honestly, I just feel like these fish in those smaller areas are further along. And so it's kind of it's gotten interesting. We're seeing right now, and I know I've said this a million times. We're seeing stuff that we've never seen before on this lake. Yeah, it's an anomaly. It may, hopefully it'll never happen again. Hopefully we'll never see a dam failure where it causes an influx of water and it's got these fish kind of thrown off their game a little bit. So this is kind of unprecedented, but I'm hoping what we're talking about right now will actually help some of you guys as we push into the fall to winter transition. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about right now is, again, going back. We're going to backtrack a little bit. Very low on grass this year compared to years past. And we have a lot of fish because of that dirty influx of water that are way ahead of schedule. When I say that, I'm going to actually show this real quick. Let's see if I can go to this other screen. Boom. Okay. When I say ahead of schedule, so one of the things that, especially with the advent of forward-facing sonar, we have started to find a lot of, ooh, what in the world? I have no idea what's happening. Okay, a lot of these open water fish. And they sit a lot of times at the mouths of these creeks. And they'll do this all winter. They could be all the way at the tip of a mouth, you know, where it meets a channel like this. But what I notice is a lot of times it's on a lot of these little secondary areas as you're moving back into the creeks. And this is deep water for us, you know, like average depth on Tennessee River and Chickamauga Lake for the channel is around, you know, mid 30s to 40 feet. And that's where these fish will hang out. And they'll just kind of, they loosely hold to some of the structures of the lake itself, but a lot of it you just find that they just cruise out here independently, either as singles or in very small groups. And this is where a lot of big ones get, and they just kind of cruise nomadically and you know, school on open water bait, so to speak. And a lot of these big gizzard shad, they're going to be pulling out here and doing the same deal. Now with all this water that was coming down the main lake over here, you know, the water we were getting from North Carolina, a lot of those fish made the jump. And what you'll find is there's different populations of fish. I've said this in previous videos, but we'll kind of go back on that. So there's a population of fish on the lake. Let's say there's 30% of fish. They stay deep. They stay on a lot of our summertime fishing holes, you know, main lake. And that's how they live their lives. They stay out there. Now, there's another maybe 30% or so, depending on the lake, that live way backs in creeks, that live in on pockets, and they live on big flats, pretty much exclusively. That's their only gig. That's all they do. And then there's another population of fish, let's say 40% roughly, that actually do this migration thing that we've always read about on Bassmaster magazine. They push out post spawn and they live in the summer way out, and then they push in the spring and in the fall, either to spawn or to eat, and then they push back out in the wintertime. Okay, so these fish, in my opinion, I believe a lot of these open water fish that we see at the mouths of creeks, that we see on channel swings, main lake, I feel like those are a lot of fish that pretty much stay out most of the time. They make little movements in. They're their own little population, their own little deal, and they're already there. Okay, now there's another population of fish that, you know, lives a little bit shallower, that they live in the back of the creeks. It's like they're still way back. Okay, guys, they're way at the beginning stages of their fall, you know, route and what they're doing. And there's the other ones that migrate a lot, and I feel like they are just a little bit behind too. So we've got one type of fish on the lake that I feel like is way ahead. Like they're already in your wintertime holes. Like you can go and do your wintertime fishing for those particular fish, which is a lot of the fish that I chase in the winter are those fish in particular. And then the other two types of fish, it's like they're just figuring it out because we haven't had the weather. That's another thing we haven't really talked about yet is we have had consistent warm weather. Like I don't even know what the temperature is right now. Let's see. It's 71 degrees outside and raining. And it's our lows have been in the 50s, even in the 60s, and our highs they haven't been terrible. It's been in the 70s or so, but for this fall bite to really, really kick and for it to be just insane, that really good bite that we all dream of in the fall, you really need those water temperatures to fall into the low 70s, into the 60s. And that's really what kicks that off. Really cold mornings, that's what gets those bigger fish going, eating a frog. Those bigger fish feeding on bigger bait. When we start talking about this time of year, a lot of times I'm starting to pull out a lot bigger bait, or I'm starting to cast net a lot bigger bait because these fish, when they start making this transition into the early winter period, they really upsize what they want to eat. And so you can get away with throwing a lot bigger baits at them. You can get away with throwing a lot bigger live baits at them because a lot of the really big fish are wanting to take a shot at that point at the big bait. And so it just makes it's just making everything pretty interesting. Let's just put it that way. So these fish are not quite where they need to be, and I think it's just a weather thing. If we could just get some, some frost, some lows that are lower, the days are already the right amount of time. Now, in the fall time of the year, when this bite really kicks off and it really gets special out there, especially the afternoon bite, the way I always look at it is just like this. So when you get to the beginning part of the day and it gets about 10 o'clock or so, and you can't really, so just imagine you were bed fishing and you can see the light angle when you get to this time of the year. It's like you're in this weird twilight phase until about 10 o'clock. And then at that point, about 10 o'clock, you're like, I could bed fish right now. And then later in the day, let's say, I guess now with the time change, it'd be about 3 o'clock. You're like, I couldn't bed fish anymore. You get these weird twilight phases, and that really kicks off a lot of the schooling bite for me. So we're in that phase already. As far as the light being right, the length of days is right. We're getting eaten alive by mosquitoes in the afternoon, so we know that's right. The only thing that we're missing right now is just the cooler weather. And now that this lake is finally stabilized in Main Lake, there's some fish actually doing what they're supposed to do on the flats. So I perceive in the next couple 3 weeks, if we can get some colder weather, this could be just absolutely a wide open, amazing fall bite. And even if the temperatures don't really improve for us that much, even if we kind of do like we've done in a few years past, where we just like go immediately from an early fall pattern straight into winter, it seems like we get maybe like a week of a true fall bite. Everything's lining up for the fish to actually be spread out again across the lake, catchable fish, and just make fishing really good for everybody. So I know I've talked to a lot of people lately that have been discouraged because everything is so strange. And I know, speaking from experience as a guide and talking to a lot of the other guides around here, it has been frustrating in a lot of ways because instead of drawing on previous experience, we've had to kind of reinvent the wheel in a lot of ways over the last little while. Been successful doing it, but it makes our jobs a lot harder when we have to do that. So we're kind of pulling out of this phase now, and these fish are starting to cooperate and do what they're supposed to do. So I'm really excited about, we've got some low pressure systems outside. You guys can't see it. I'm looking out at it right now. It's drizzling outside a little bit. It's just light rain. A lot of the trees are dropping all their leaves and stuff. So we're in this magical period right now where everything's going to start acting right. And I'm really excited about it. So you guys stay tuned. There's going to be some really big fish that are going to hit the deck here. We actually already had a really big one. I had a trip yesterday. And little boy, turned 8 years old. And he said he wanted to catch an 8-pounder for his birthday. And like 10 minutes later, he catches an 8.3. And it was on a bigger bait. It was on like an 8-inch bait. So that, again, clues me in that we are making the transition. I'm seeing big fish chasing big bait. So things are happening out there, guys. Don't get discouraged. Make sure that you are fishing hard. if you're out here on Tennessee River right now, I don't care if it's Chickamauga Lake where I guide every day, if it's Watts Bar, if it's Nickajack, if it's Gunnersville, fish hard throughout the day and do not give up in that last couple hours, guys. You really need to fish till dark this time of year. If you can't fish the morning time, get out there and fish in the afternoon, because what'll happen is you'll see more schooling fish, you'll see more schooling activity in the afternoon this time of year than you will during the rest of the day. What that'll help you do is it'll help you do homework on where the bigger fish are setting up in these areas, whether it's a flat, a pocket, a creek, doesn't matter. By doing that and seeing visually, because you can cover more water with your eyes than you can with side scan, than you can with live scope or anything else. When that water starts to flatten out in the fall time of year, when we start getting towards dark, and you look out there and you can see the activity 300 yards away, that makes all the difference in the world on getting in the right position to be ahead of the bite as we finish up the fall time, and being the first guy to the prize as we get into the early winter period, okay? So do your homework now, get ahead of the game. Other guys will be doing it later. They'll be chasing birds here in another month, right? If you go ahead and do that homework now, you can be catching those fish for 3 weeks to a month before these guys even get to throw a lure at them. That's going to increase your chances exponentially on catching above average size fish, especially. Okay, so get out there, work hard, don't get discouraged, and I hope this week finds you out on the water. I'm gonna swap my camera view. Hope this week finds you out on the water, guys, and I'll catch you there.